Nneka was on her hands and knees. The cold Italian marble of the Landmark Continental ballroom bit deeply into her swollen joints. She was exactly 8 months pregnant, dragging a damp cloth across a puddle of spilled red wine, while Nneka stood directly above her. A crystal champagne flute balanced effortlessly in one manicured hand. Nneka did not scream. She did not beg. She had learned, over the 8 agonizing months since she had been driven into the unforgiving rains of Lagos, that screaming only made the powerful smile. What Nneka did not know, what the glamorous socialite would not discover until the champagne ran completely dry, was that the child pressing so heavily against Nneka's exhausted spine was the sole legal heir to the Eagle Crest Industries empire. Furthermore, if Nneka had bothered to look closely at the frayed front pocket of Nneka's staff apron, beneath the harsh scent of industrial bleach and stale sweat, she would not have seen just a collection of cleaning rags. Tucked deep inside the lining, wrapped in protective plastic, sat the original, unsigned transfer deed for 51% of the company, alongside a cheap digital audio recorder holding a conversation that was about to destroy 2 prominent families. The ballroom of the Landmark Continental was a cathedral of modern wealth. 3 massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, golden illumination over 300 of the wealthiest individuals in the city. The air conditioning hummed a silent, freezing tune, perfectly calibrated to keep the men comfortable in their imported wool suits and the women fresh in their silk evening gowns. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive French perfumes, cold silver cutlery clinking against fine porcelain, and the muted, sophisticated murmur of people who traded millions of dollars over casual cocktails. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved like ghosts among the round tables, carrying trays of seared scallops and imported caviar. Down on the floor, breathing in the sharp, chemical odor of floor cleaner, Nneka existed in an entirely different universe. Her world was defined by the severe ache in her lower back, a constant throbbing pressure that radiated down her thighs with every movement. Her feet, shoved into cheap, rubber-soled black shoes that were now 2 sizes too small due to the swelling, burned as though she were standing on hot coals. The stiff fabric of her hotel uniform scratched relentlessly against her skin. She moved the cloth in slow, deliberate circles, watching the red wine dilute into a pale pink foam. Nneka shifted her weight, the heel of her designer shoe stopping exactly 2 inches from Nneka's trembling fingers. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that caught the chandelier light with every breath she took. Her presence was a monument to privilege, her skin flawless, her posture radiating the kind of absolute arrogance that only came from generational wealth. "You missed a spot," Nneka said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a sharp, cutting quality that sliced effortlessly through the ambient noise of the ballroom. Nneka did not look up. She shifted her weight painfully onto her left knee, her breath catching in her throat as the baby delivered a sharp kick directly against her ribs. She moved the rag over the spotless section of marble Nneka had pointed to. "It is fascinating," Nneka continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip from her flute. "How naturally people regress to their proper stations in life. When Obinna brought you into his circles, you wore the designer clothes. You sat at the tables. You tried so very hard to mimic the cadence of our speech, but look at you now. Some women are built to sit in boardrooms, Nneka. Others are simply built to scrub the floors beneath them. It is not a tragedy. It is just the natural order of the world." The words did not wound her in the way Nneka had intended. They landed instead on an older, far more calloused surface within Nneka's mind. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, not from humiliation, but from the absolute precision of her own memory. Nneka believed she was delivering a fatal emotional blow, establishing dominance over a defeated rival. She did not realize she was merely speaking lines in a script Nneka had already memorized. The insult about her pedigree was the exact same phrasing Madame Eunice had used 8 months prior in the flooded courtyard of the Obinna family estate when she had tossed Nneka's meager belongings into the mud. Some doors open because you push them. Others open because you hold the key and simply wait for the person inside to set the house on fire. "I heard you the first time," Nneka said. Her voice was quiet, completely devoid of tremor or tears. She squeezed the damp rag over a small plastic bucket, watching the pink water spiral down into the suds. She did not raise her head. She did not alter the rhythm of her breathing. Nneka frowned slightly, clearly unsatisfied with the lack of tears. She had expected begging. She had expected a broken woman to look up with pleading eyes, utterly ruined by the spectacle of her former husband's lavish engagement to another woman. Instead, she was met with a glacial stillness that she could not comprehend. "You should finish quickly," Nneka sneered, her tone hardening. "Obinna will be arriving in 20 minutes. He has an empire to run and a proper future wife to present to the board. I would hate for his evening to be ruined by the sight of a pregnant cleaner reminding him of the worst mistake he ever made. Though, judging by the size of you, perhaps you found another desperate man to burden the moment you realized the Okafor family fortune was out of your reach." Heat climbed from Nneka's collar into her hairline as her own anger flared, unprovoked by anything other than Nneka's maddening silence. Nneka slowly placed the rag into the bucket. She gripped the edge of a nearby service cart and hauled herself upward. The physical effort cost her dearly. Her vision blurred for a fraction of a second, black spots dancing at the edge of her sight, but she locked her knees and stood tall. She looked directly into Nneka's eyes. Nneka cataloged the nervous flutter in Nneka's pulse, visible just beneath the heavy diamond necklace resting on her collarbone. She noted the slight tension in the woman's grip on the champagne glass. Nneka was terrified, not of Nneka the cleaner, but of the ghost Nneka represented. "The floor is clean," Nneka stated, her tone as flat and unremarkable as a dial tone. She turned her back on the emerald dress, pushing the heavy service cart toward the swinging doors of the kitchen corridor. As she pushed the cart through the heavy wooden doors, the deafening silence of the service hallway swallowed her. The transition was immediate. The scent of expensive perfumes vanished, replaced instantly by the heavy, humid smell of boiling yams, roasted goat meat, and the metallic tang of commercial dishwashers. The air here was hot, thick with the sweat of 50 kitchen workers shouting orders over the roar of industrial ventilation fans. Nneka pushed the cart into a small alcove near the laundry chute and leaned heavily against the tiled wall. Her heartbeat moved into her ears. She could taste copper at the back of her throat. She placed both hands over her massive belly, closing her eyes as she focused entirely on slowing her breathing. The baby was restless, shifting heavily, pressing down on her pelvis with an urgency that terrified her. "Not yet," she whispered to the life inside her. "Please, not yet." Her mind drifted backward, pulled by the gravity of Nneka's cruel words, to the night that had set all of this into motion, 8 months ago. The rain had been falling in thick, blinding sheets across the city of Lagos. Obinna had been lying in a private hospital suite, unconscious, recovering from an emergency surgery that had drained every remaining naira from his newly founded startup. The company was hours away from total bankruptcy. The creditors were circling. Obinna had been terrified, broken by the weight of a dream that was collapsing. It was Madame Eunice, Obinna's mother, who had arrived at the hospital with a briefcase and a demonic ultimatum. Nneka remembered the bitter chill of the hospital corridor. She remembered the way Madame Eunice's expensive silk wrapper had rustled as she sat across from her. "My son is dying of stress because of you," Madame Eunice had said, her voice dripping with venom. "You are a parasite, Nneka. A girl from the gutters of Enugu who thought she could latch onto an eagle. I have the funds to save his company. I have the investors ready to inject the capital he needs to survive the quarter, but the money does not move while you share his bed." Madame Eunice had slid a manila envelope across the cold metal table. Inside is a legal separation agreement. You will sign it, you will pack your cheap bags, and you will disappear from his life completely. You will not explain, you will not call, You will let him believe you abandoned him because his money ran out. If you do this, I wire the funds and Eagle Crest Industries lives. If you refuse, I watch his company die, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life watching him resent you for it." Nneka had felt a coldness open in her chest that night, a void that refused to close. She loved Obinna with a ferocity that defied logic. She had watched him skip meals to afford server space for his tech platform. She had held him while he wept over rejected loan applications. She knew that if his company failed now, it would destroy his spirit entirely. But what Madame Eunice did not know was that earlier that same day, a panicked junior lawyer had visited the hospital looking for Obinna, carrying the foundational corporate shares that needed to be transferred to a holding account to protect them from creditors. Obinna was unconscious. The lawyer, frantic and facing a deadline, had handed the document to Nneka for safekeeping, and she had kept them. Nneka had signed the separation papers. She had walked out into the torrential rain with nothing but a small duffel bag and a broken heart. She had let Obinna believe the worst about her, because his hatred would fuel his recovery, while his love for her would only tether him to a sinking ship. She had vanished into the sprawling, invisible underbelly of Lagos, taking jobs, washing dishes, sweeping markets, and finally cleaning rooms at the Landmark Continental. But she had kept the shares, and she had kept the small audio recorder she carried for her university lectures, which had been resting quietly in her handbag during Madame Eunice's vicious hospital ultimatum, capturing every single word. Nneka opened her eyes in the sweltering kitchen corridor. She pressed a hand against the front pocket of her apron, feeling the solid, rectangular outline of the recorder through the stiff fabric. She was no longer the frightened girl crying in the rain. She had survived 8 months of near starvation. She had survived the physical agony of a high-risk pregnancy while carrying buckets of dirty water up flights of stairs. She had built an architecture of absolute endurance. Later that evening, as the string quartet tuned their instruments in the grand ballroom and the guests gathered their crystal glasses for the first toast, the heavy double doors at the main entrance swung open. The room shifted. The ambient chatter died down to a respectful, admiring hush. Nneka stood in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, clutching a fresh stack of linen napkins to her chest, her jaw locked. A single vein pulsed steadily at her temple. Obinna had arrived. He looked magnificent. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo tailored to absolute perfection. His shoulders were broad, his posture radiating the immense, terrifying power of a man who had conquered the corporate world and emerged as a titan. He was no longer the desperate, exhausted dreamer she had left in that hospital bed. He was the chairman of Eagle Crest Industries. He moved through the crowd with glacial confidence, nodding briefly to senators and oil barons. Nneka immediately materialized at his side, slipping her arm through his, flashing a brilliant, victorious smile to the photographers who scrambled to capture the golden couple. Madame Eunice followed closely behind them, draped in heavy gold jewelry, looking upon her son with the smug satisfaction of an architect admiring her finished monument. Nneka watched him. Her breathing shallowed. She cataloged the way his eyes scanned the room, noting that despite the wealth, despite the beautiful woman clinging to his arm, his expression carried a distinct, hollow shadow. He was looking for something. Nneka stepped back further into the shadows, the linoleum floor squeaking softly beneath her worn shoes. The trap she had endured 8 months of hell to build was finally primed. The players were in position. She tightened her grip on the linen napkins, her face a mask of complete and total calm. The transition from the cocktail reception to the grand dining phase of the evening was marked by the subtle shift in the string quartet's tempo. Guests began to migrate toward the massive, circular tables that anchored the room, guided by hostesses holding silver placards. It was then that the banquet manager, a frantic man perspiring heavily into his starched collar, found Nneka near the service elevators. He grabbed her roughly by the elbow, pulling her away from the laundry cart. "Table 1, he hissed, his breath carrying the sour tang of nervous coffee. The chairman's table. Madame Eunice specifically requested that the pregnant cleaner from the lobby be the one to pour their water and clear their plates. She said it would be a good reminder of humility for the staff. You will not speak, you will not make eye contact, you will pour, you will clear, and you will remain invisible. Do you understand?" Nneka did not nod. She simply took the heavy silver water pitcher he shoved into her hands. The condensation on the cold metal seeped into her calloused palms, stinging the microcuts she had acquired from months of scrubbing harsh chemical detergents without gloves. She walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom. Table 1 was a fortress of absolute luxury. The centerpiece was a sprawling arrangement of imported white orchids that smelled faintly of vanilla and wealth. Cold silver cutlery rested heavily on pressed linen tablecloths that had never seen a stain. The contrast was violently physical as Nneka approached. Her cheap, oversized rubber shoes squeaked faintly against the marble, her uniform carrying the distinct, stale odor of commercial kitchens and physical labor, invading the pristine, air-conditioned bubble of the corporate elite. Ekayat sat to Obinna's right. Madame Eunice sat to his left. Nneka stepped up to Madame Eunice's shoulder and tipped the heavy silver pitcher over the crystal goblet. Madame Eunice did not look at her. She simply leaned toward a senator's wife seated across the table and smiled. "We must always find ways to employ the wretched," Madame Eunice said, her voice a perfectly modulated purr. "It is our duty as the pillars of society to give the desperate a floor to scrub. Otherwise, they simply multiply in the streets. Look at this one. No husband, clearly no future, just another mouth to feed on the charity of better people." Nneka finished pouring. She moved to Ekayat's glass. "Be careful with the water," Ekayat murmured, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Your hands are shaking. People like you always ruin expensive things when you get too close to them." Nneka moved to the final glass, Obinna's glass. As the water hit the crystal, Obinna turned his head. His gaze, previously locked in a hollow stare at the stage, snapped directly onto Nneka's face. The color left his face the way light leaves a room when someone severs the main power line. His hand, which had been reaching for a piece of bread, stopped midair and began to tremble. His breathing hitched, shallow and erratic, as his eyes dragged downward from her exhausted, sunken face to the massive, undeniable curve of her 8-month pregnancy pressing against the edge of the dining table. For 8 months, he had believed she was living comfortably in some other city, having abandoned him when his accounts were frozen and his cars were repossessed. He had built an empire on the fuel of that betrayal. And now, she was standing in front of him, wearing the uniform of a hotel servant, her knuckles swollen and raw. "Nneka," he whispered. The name seemed to tear its way out of his throat, leaving a trail of broken glass behind it. The conversation at table 1 abruptly died. Madame Eunice stiffened. Ekayat's smile crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. Obinna stood up. His chair scraped violently against the marble. He looked at her uniform, then at her stomach, and the confusion in his eyes rapidly mutated into a hardened, defensive cruelty. He retreated into the only armor he had left. "You left," Obinna said, his voice dropping to a low, trembling octave that only the immediate table could hear. "You threw away a marriage because the apartment roof leaked and the corporate accounts were seized. You could not handle the poverty for 1 more week. Did whoever you sold your loyalty to throw you out into the street the moment you got heavy?" Nneka did not flinch. She did not raise the pitcher. She looked at the man she had willingly starved for, the man whose tech empire existed solely because she had traded her own future to buy his survival. She cataloged the betrayal in his eyes, the absolute certainty of his own victimhood. "I know," Nneka said quietly. She did not offer a single syllable of defense. "That is what I expected you to say." She turned and walked away, her spine perfectly straight despite the agonizing pressure in her lower back. The words Obinna had spoken were meant to inflict profound damage, They were meant to reassert his dominance over the woman who had allegedly broken him. But the autopsy of that exchange revealed a different reality. The cruelty did not wound Nneka because it was built on a foundation of total ignorance. It landed instead on the impenetrable armor of her own factual superiority. Obinna believed he was looking down at a traitor who had crawled back to beg for scraps from his table. He had no idea that he was looking up at the landlord of his entire reality. Power does not need to explain itself to the powerless, even when the powerless are wearing expensive suits. If Obinna had bothered to excuse himself, if he had followed her through the swinging doors and demanded the truth, he would have learned it. But his pride anchored him to the chair. And so, he remained blind to the machinery that was already moving perfectly into place. 20 minutes later, the ballroom was deeply engaged in the main course. Nneka stood in the shadows of the third-floor service corridor, far away from the music and the clinking glasses. The air up here smelled of dust and ozone from the heavy electrical panels. A tall man in a tailored, unassuming gray suit stepped out of the service elevator. Barrister Chike was 60 years old, a man who possessed the quiet, lethal efficiency of a career corporate litigator. He had been the Okafor family's private legal counsel for 2 decades, until Madame Eunice had forced him out for refusing to facilitate the hostile takeover of Obinna's early patents. He approached Nneka and offered a deep, respectful nod. He did not look at her maid's uniform. He looked at her with the deference reserved for royalty. "Is it time, madam?" Barrister Chike asked, his voice a low gravel. Nneka reached into the deep, frayed pocket of her apron. Her rough fingers brushed past the damp cleaning cloths and extracted the plastic-wrapped package. She unwrapped it carefully, pulling out the original, uncreased transfer deed for 51% of Eaglecrest Industries. Beside it, she produced the small, scratched, digital audio recorder. She handed both to the lawyer. "The shares have remained unregistered for 8 months, Barrister Chike said, inspecting the watermarks on the heavy paper. "The moment I file this with the corporate registrar downstairs in the business center, Obinna ceases to be the majority owner. You will possess absolute controlling interest. Madame Eunice's board seats will be instantly nullified." "File it," Nneka said, her voice steady. "And this?" He held up the audio recorder. "Take it to the audio-visual control booth," Nneka instructed, staring past him down the long, empty hallway. "Plug it directly into the master soundboard. When the chairman raises his glass for the final toast, you will press play." Barrister Chike nodded once. "It is an honor to finally see the house cleaned properly," he murmured, before turning and stepping back into the elevator. The transfer of the documents shifted the entire molecular structure of Nneka's universe. For 8 months, those items had been a burden, a heavy secret she carried through slums and hospital waiting rooms. Now, by simply handing them to the lawyer, the burden transformed into a weapon. She had endured the rain, she had endured the hunger, she had endured the public humiliation of the rag and the bucket. She was no longer a victim waiting for rescue. She was the architect of an execution, returning to the viewing gallery to watch the trap spring shut. Some women survive the fire. Others learn to breathe the smoke until they can control the flames. Nneka took the staff staircase back down to the ground floor. As she exited into the marble-lined hallway leading to the ballroom, a heavy hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. A sharp jolt of pain shot up her spine as she collided with the wall. Madame Eunice stood before her, flanked by 2 private security guards. The older woman's face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. The heavy gold chains around her neck clinked softly as she stepped into Nneka's personal space. "You are a cockroach," Madame Eunice hissed, her voice echoing off the polished marble walls. "I paid you to disappear. I paid you to crawl into whatever slum birthed you and die quietly. And yet, you bring your swollen, pathetic body to my son's engagement. You purposely sought employment here to parade your failure in front of him. You think your presence will spark some lingering guilt? You think he will look at a beggar and remember a wife?" Nneka looked at the older woman. She noted the frantic, aggressive energy vibrating in Madame Eunice's posture. It was the energy of a woman who knew she only held power through intimidation, unaware that the ground beneath her feet had already been sold. "You have no family. You have no name. You have nothing," Madame Eunice continued, stepping closer until her expensive perfume threatened to choke the air from Nneka's lungs. "You will serve the dessert. You will watch my son place a 10 million naira diamond on a woman who actually belongs in our world. And then you will be escorted out the back door with the rest of the garbage." Nneka held Madame Eunice's gaze. She did not shrink back against the wall. She did not raise her hands in defense. She stood with the absolute, terrifying stillness of a predator watching a snare tighten. "Thank you for clarifying," Nneka said, her voice dropping to a whisper of profound calm. Madame Eunice's jaw tightened, infuriated by the lack of submission. But before she could deliver another threat, the ballroom doors swung open. The master of ceremonies' voice boomed over the speakers, calling for the families to gather on the main stage for the grand toast. Madame Eunice sneered, adjusted her silk wrapper, and marched toward the doors. "Watch closely, peasant," she threw over her shoulder. Nneka stepped away from the wall. The ache in her back was a dull roar, but she did not limp. She walked slowly, deliberately, following the trail of expensive perfume back into the light of the chandeliers. The engine of karma had finished assembling itself in the dark. It was time to pull the lever. The grand stage at the front of the ballroom was bathed in a brilliant, blinding spotlight. The master of ceremonies, a famous television personality in a silver jacket, tapped the microphone. A sharp, clear chime echoed through the Landmark Continental, immediately silencing the ambient chatter of 300 millionaires. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, senators, and titans of industry," the MC boomed, his voice radiating manufactured joy. "We have reached the pinnacle of our evening. I ask you all to charge your glasses. It is time to hear from the man of the hour, the visionary, the chairman, Mr. Obinna Okafor." The applause that erupted was deafening. It rolled across the room like thunder, a physical wave of adoration and envy. Obinna stepped up to the acrylic podium. Nneka stood to his right, her hand resting possessively on his bicep, her diamond engagement ring catching the spotlight and throwing fractured rainbows across the ceiling. Madame Eunice stood to his left, her chin raised, surveying the crowd with the absolute authority of a queen mother who had finally secured her dynasty. At the base of the stage stairs, exactly where the banquet manager had positioned her, Nneka stood holding a silver tray laden with 3 fresh flutes of vintage champagne. Her uniform was still damp from the spilled wine. The severe ache in her lower back had mutated into a dull, agonizing burn that wrapped around her abdomen. The baby was pressing downward with brutal consistency. She locked her knees, staring blankly at the polished wood of the stage steps. Obinna adjusted the microphone. The room fell into a reverent hush. "1 year ago, I had nothing," Obinna began. His voice was smooth, carrying the deep, resonant cadence of a man who believed every word of his own mythology. "I was lying in a hospital bed, watching the monitors count my heartbeats, waiting for my company to be dissolved by creditors. I learned very quickly in that dark room that success is not just about vision. It is about loyalty. It is about who stays in the room when the lights go out." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. He turned slightly, looking first at his mother, then at his beautiful fiancée. "I learned that some people are only built for the sunshine," Obinna continued, his tone darkening slightly, carrying a bitter edge that only Nneka truly understood. "They disappear at the first drop of rain. But true family, true partners, they weather the storm with you. My mother brought me back from the brink, and Nneka, you have shown me what a true partnership looks like. Tonight is not just an engagement, it is a foundation." The applause swelled again. Nneka beamed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Obinna's speech was a masterpiece of self-deception. The psychological autopsy of his address revealed a man desperately trying to construct a narrative that justified his current reality. By framing Nneka's departure as an act of cowardice, he absolved himself of the guilt of moving on so quickly. By elevating his mother's financial rescue to an act of pure maternal love, he ignored the toxic control she wielded over his life. He was a conqueror standing on a mountain of ashes, entirely unaware that he had not lit the fire, and that the person who had was currently standing at the bottom of the stairs, holding his champagne. Nneka motioned toward the base of the stage. She pointed directly at Nneka. "Bring the glasses up," Nneka commanded. She did not use a microphone, but her voice carried effortlessly in the quiet room. "Let us have the staff join in the blessing." It was the ultimate, calculated cruelty. Nneka wanted the pregnant, exhausted ex-wife to ascend the brightly lit stage, to stand beneath the glare of 300 pairs of eyes, and hand over the celebratory drinks to the woman who had replaced her. Nneka did not hesitate. She placed her right foot on the first wooden step. A sharp, blinding pain shot through her pelvis. Her jaw locked. A single vein pulsed at her temple. She took the second step. The silver tray in her hands was perfectly level. She reached the top of the stairs and walked toward the podium. She extended the tray. Obinna did not look at her face. He took the first glass, his eyes scanning the crowd. Nneka took the second glass, flashing a vicious, triumphant smirk that only Nneka could see. Madame Eunice took the final glass, her heavy gold bracelets clinking against the crystal. "To the future," Obinna announced into the microphone, raising his glass high. "To the future," the crowd echoed back. Before a single drop of champagne could touch Obinna's lips, a harsh, violent crackle of static exploded through the ballroom's massive speaker system. The crowd flinched. Several women covered their ears. Obinna lowered his glass, frowning at the audio technicians in the back of the room. He tapped the microphone. It was dead. The static cleared. And then, a voice echoed through the cathedral of modern wealth. It was not a live voice. It was hollow, tinny, carrying the distinct background hum of a hospital ventilation unit and the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. "My son is dying of stress because of you." The voice belonged to Madame Eunice. It was unmistakable. The aristocratic cadence, the sharp, dripping condescension. On the stage, Madame Eunice froze. The champagne flute in her hand began to tremble. The recording continued to broadcast, booming over the heads of the senators and the CEOs, exposing the sterile, ruthless mechanics of their host's rise to power. "You are a parasite, Nneka. A girl from the gutters of Enugu who thought she could latch onto an eagle. I have the funds to save his company. I have the investors ready. But the money does not move while you share his bed." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Faces turned toward the stage. Inside is a legal separation agreement. You will sign it, you will pack your cheap bags, and you will disappear from his life completely. You will not explain, you will not call. You will let him believe you abandoned him because his money ran out. If you refuse, I watch his company die, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life watching him resent you for it. The recording clicked. The static returned for a brief second, and then the speakers went completely dead. The conversation at the 300 tables stopped. The cellist, halfway through a vibrato, pulled his bow away from the strings. A waiter with a tray of desserts stood frozen in the center aisle, as though any movement might trigger a detonation. The color left Obinna's face the way light leaves a room when someone severs the main power line. Not gradually, but all at once. His hand, still gripping the heavy silver microphone, dropped slowly to his side. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Madame Eunice's knees buckled. Her hands scrambled desperately for the edge of the acrylic podium, her gold bracelets clattering violently against the plastic as she fought to keep herself upright. Nneka took one step backward, then another, until the heel of her designer shoe caught the edge of the stage monitor. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floorboards, spraying wine and glass across the polished wood. Nneka did not move. Her hands remained folded over the wet her apron, exactly as they had been folded 5 minutes earlier when Eka had called her a cockroach. Her breathing did not change. She had waited 8 months for this silence. She was not going to interrupt it. The silence dragged on, heavy and suffocating. It was the sound of a billion-dollar mythology collapsing into dust. Footsteps echoed from the back of the hall. The crowd parted instinctively. Barrister Chaik walked slowly down the center aisle, his tailored gray suit a stark contrast to the glittering evening wear around him. He did not look at the guests. He walked directly to the stage, ascended the stairs, and stopped beside the podium. He did not need a microphone. In the absolute quiet of the room, his low, gravelly voice carried perfectly to every corner. As of 7 minutes ago, Barrister Chike announced, retrieving a stamped, watermarked document from the inside pocket of his jacket, this transfer deed has been legally registered with the Corporate Commission. The foundational shares of Eagle Crest Industries, representing 51% of total ownership, which were signed over by Chairman Obinna Okafor on the night of his emergency surgery, have been formally claimed. He turned slowly, looking directly at Madame Eunice, who was now gripping the podium with white knuckles, her breath coming in shallow, frantic gasps. "The money you wired to save this company did not purchase equity, madam," the lawyer stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "It purchased debt. Debt to a company that you do not own." Barrister Chaik turned his gaze to Obinna, who was staring at Nneka as if she were a ghost that had just materialized from the floorboards. "You are no longer the majority shareholder, Obinna," the lawyer concluded. "The company belongs to the woman holding the silver tray and to the legal heir she is currently carrying." The architecture of Madame Eunice's reality imploded. She had spent decades building a fortress of manipulation and financial blackmail. She had believed that money could erase any inconvenience, that she could surgically remove a poor girl from her son's life and rewrite history. But her money had been a paper shield against a woman armed with absolute patience. The psychological collapse of the matriarch was total. She opened her mouth to scream, to demand security, to threaten lawsuits, but her vocal cords refused to function. Eka, trembling violently in her emerald dress, stared at Obinna. The man she thought she was marrying, the titan, the billionaire, the ultimate prize, was suddenly just a minority employee in a company owned by the woman she had spent the evening torturing. Heat climbed from Kate's collar into her hairline. Her glamorous smile shattered, revealing the terrifying, desperate realization that she had tethered her entire social existence to a sinking ship. Obinna finally moved. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a dull thud. He took a slow, agonizing step toward Nneka. His chest heaved. The betrayal he had nursed for 8 months, the anger that had fueled his 14-hour workdays, the entire foundation of his new life, it was all a lie. She had not abandoned him. She had saved him. She had walked out into the rain with nothing, carrying his child so that he could live. And he had stood on this stage in front of 300 people and mocked her for it. Something cold opened in his chest and refused to close. His gaze dropped to the marble floor, unable to meet the absolute stillness in her eyes. He looked at her swollen stomach, the violent reality of her physical suffering hitting him like a physical blow. "Nneka," he whispered. His voice broke. Tears, hot and jagged, spilled over his lower lashes. His hands began to tremble violently. I didn't know. They didn't tell me. I swear to God, I didn't know." Nneka looked at the man who was weeping before her. She catalogued the devastation in his posture, the genuine horror of his realization. But she also remembered the coldness of his voice when he poured his water, the ease with which he had believed the worst of her. "I know," Nneka said. Her voice was conversational, steady, carrying the calm precision of a judge reading a finalized sentence. "I have always known." Obinna fell to his knees. The expensive fabric of his tuxedo pooled against the spilled champagne and broken crystal. He reached out with shaking hands, desperate to touch the hem of her apron, desperate for some tether to the woman he had thrown away. "Please," he begged, the word tearing out of him in a ragged sob. "Please, Nneka, tell me this isn't real. Tell me I haven't done this to you, to our baby. Please." Nneka did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She looked down at the man kneeling in the glass. "You should sit down," Nneka said softly. She turned her back on him. She did not look at Madame Eunice, who was now weeping silently against the podium. She did not look at Aket, who was staring at the floor in a state of catatonic shock. She did not look at the 300 guests who were watching the destruction of the Okafor dynasty in absolute silence. Nneka walked slowly toward the edge of the stage. The ache in her back flared with vicious intensity, a sharp, searing pain that forced her to pause on the first step. She gripped the wooden handrail, her knuckles turning white. She placed her other hand firmly over her massive belly, offering a silent, fierce promise to the child kicking frantically against her ribs. She descended the stairs. The crowd parted immediately, creating a wide, silent path through the center of the ballroom. Senators, socialites, and corporate executives stepped back, lowering their eyes as the pregnant cleaner walked past them. She moved with glacial, terrifying dignity, leaving the broken pieces of a billionaire's empire scattered on the stage behind her. The heavy glass doors of the Landmark Continental slid shut behind Nneka, severing the frozen silence of the grand ballroom from the living, breathing chaos of the Lagos night. The transition was immediate and violent. The sterile, freezing air conditioning of the billionaire's sanctuary vanished, replaced instantly by the thick, humid blanket of the coastal city. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, roasted plantains from a distant street vendor, and the damp, metallic tang of an approaching ocean storm. The chaotic symphony of Okada horns and the low mechanical growl of diesel generators completely drowned out the memory of the string quartet. Nneka stopped at the edge of the circular driveway. She placed both hands against the small of her back, leaning backward to stretch the agonizingly tight muscles. The baby shifted, delivering a strong, rolling kick against her ribs. She patted the side of her stomach, her breathing slowing to a steady, rhythmic pace. A sleek, black luxury car idled near the valet stand, its polished surface reflecting the orange glow of the streetlights. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, watched her nervously. He had undoubtedly received a panic transmission through his earpiece from the security team inside. He took a hesitant step toward her, reaching for the rear door handle, assuming that the new majority shareholder of Eagle Crest Industries would require an immediate escort to a private estate. Nneka did not walk toward the luxury vehicle. She turned her back on the polished chrome and the leather seats. She walked toward the pedestrian exit, her cheap rubber shoes squeaking faintly against the damp concrete. The psychological autopsy of her departure was simple. Stripped of any lingering romantic delusion, Obinna's tears on the stage, the absolute devastation in his voice when he fell to his knees in the broken glass, had been genuine. He had been shattered by the realization of his own blindness. But genuine devastation does not rewrite history. It does not erase the 8 months she had spent starving in the rain while he built an empire on the narrative of her betrayal. Nneka had not kept the foundational shares of the company because she wanted to buy her way back into his bed. She had not endured the humiliation of the cleaning rag to secure a seat at his table. She had done it to dismantle the machinery that had tried to crush her child. By tomorrow morning, Madame Eunice would face a board of directors that she no longer controlled, her financial blackmail rendered utterly impotent. Nneka would spend the night deleting photographs from her social media profiles, her aristocratic social capital incinerated in front of 300 witnesses. Obinna would remain the chief executive officer, but he would report to a board directed entirely by the woman he had failed to protect. He would spend the rest of his life working for his daughter. Nneka stepped out onto the main avenue. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows across the cracked asphalt. She possessed 51% of a corporate empire, but as she walked through the humid night, she understood the absolute truth of the past 8 months. The money was merely a tool of exposure. The wealth had not saved her. Dignity had saved her. Patience had kept her breathing. The quiet, terrifying strength of a mother who refuses to be erased had been the true capital. The fortune was just the final, necessary weight required to balance the scales of justice. If this story reached you, share it with one woman in your life who needs to hear it. Not for me, for her. Because every woman you know is carrying a story she has never told. And somewhere in this one, maybe you heard the beginning of hers. Subscribe only if you intend to stay. This channel is not for passing traffic. It is for women who know that patience is a weapon, silence is a strategy, and the truth, given enough time, always finds the door.